Okay, my outstanding friends, Roger once again, Mud Fossil University, and today we're going to be looking at something that could be very, very, very monumental, to say the least. I did a video yesterday about Jupiter's Great Red Spot. Literally is a vagina, gave birth to Venus 3,500 years ago. And Velikovsky had all of this recorded. So I did this video yesterday and put it up here. But I just searched today to see what other people are talking about. And they're all over the place. They know there's a problem. Scientists are worried. Something wrong is happening on Jupiter right now. Yes, it's about ready to give birth. So I've been doing a little more research. Because a lot of people saying, well, what about Shoemaker-Levy 9? That hit Jupiter back in, I believe it was 1994. Now, we're going to look into that because I did look into it a little bit, and it seems plausible that that could have been the seed to get the red spot going. Because, well, you're going to see why I can say that. And we're going to look at some of these other videos about it, and NASA's video about what is actually happening since just recently. This happened very, very recent. So this is something to be somewhat concerned about. I mean, I don't know what you could do about it, but it's interesting. At least that. Okay, very few people are familiar with Immanuel Velikovsky because he has been basically written out of history, and he is now being written back into history. I wrote a book about him because I was very concerned that he was maligned maliciously. Anyway, all right, let's find out about him, and this will explain quite well. And only in a couple of minutes you'll know about Immanuel Velikovsky's claims and his book and how it met with such absolute unbelievable nastiness. Really, they were just plain nasty. Nobody asked any questions. They just said he was insane. And I know exactly how that works. I got the same exact story. Now listen to this.
14 years ago, in 1950, an amazingly unconventional thinker astounded the scientific community with a theory that challenged many of its most deeply rooted assumptions. In a persuasive bestseller, this man presented a radical view of world history that linked research and hypotheses in such diverse disciplines as astronomy, geology, comparative religion, and archaeology. A storm of protest arose from every corner of this academic world, claiming that the theory was totally wrong. This opposition soon turned into an attempt to suppress the book and discredit the man who wrote it. The man is Immanuel Velikovsky, Russian-born doctor and psychoanalyst, student of the sciences and humanities, founder and one-time editor of the Scripta Universitatis series, out of which grew the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. For the last 25 years, Dr. Velikovsky has been resident in the United States, where he has continued his studies and advanced his theories. His first book was titled Worlds in Collision, and that was followed by Ages in Chaos, Earth in Upheaval, and Oedipus and Akhenaten. Dr. Velikovsky's contention is that in the memory of man, the Earth has gone through great natural paroxysms. He's founded his theory on the ancient records of man from all over the world, on archaeological evidence in the form of ancient calendars that have become strangely obsolete, and new and radical interpretations of information from astronomy, paleontology, paleomagnetism, and evolution. In addition, Dr. Velikovsky's theory has led him to re-examine prevailing views regarding the origins of religion, as well as those which form the basis of celestial mechanics. And he also calls for a realignment of the chronologies of ancient civilizations. Well, the result of this wide-sweeping theory, as I've said, was a flood of very harsh criticism and ridicule. The scientific community was almost unanimous in rejection of his work. Jacques Barzun, Dean of Graduate Faculties at Columbia University, wrote just recently that the merits of the scientific issue do not alter the deplorable treatment Dr. Velikovsky's ideas received from the profession. The prejudging scorn and closing of ranks against the heretic showed typical guild animus. In recent years, however, evidence collected during the geophysical year and by several space probes has tended to verify several of Velikovsky's predictions. For instance, he had said in the face of strong disagreement that because of her recent birth, Venus is extremely hot, a view subsequently borne out by observations of Mariner 2. He was accused of inventing an interplanetary magnetic field, but one has been detected since then by Pioneer 5. He claimed in 1950 that the ancient civilizations of Central America were much older than believed. Recently, this view, too, has been proved by radiocarbon dating. All in all, a score of Dr. Velikovsky's predictions have been verified, and the opposition within the scientific community has abated. New voices are being heard. For instance, that of Lloyd Motz, professor of astronomy at Columbia University, who, while he still disagrees with Velikovsky, says his predictions should be recognized and his writings should be carefully studied and analyzed because they are the product of an extraordinary and brilliant mind and are based on some of the most concentrated and penetrating scholarship and research of our period.
All right, let me cut in and just make a couple of statements. I have studied Immanuel Velikovsky, and I've studied his claims in a material way, not just from the texts that he studied. He studied all the texts from all the different cultures in the world. They all had the same story. 3,500 years ago, Venus was ejected from Jupiter. And the way they claimed, the ancient myth, which we call myth, said that the feared god Jupiter gave birth to the fiery comet Venus, which almost destroyed the Earth. And, you know, there was a judgment made to destroy all of this monsters and things that were on Earth. People don't understand any of this stuff was real. Mythology has to be taken into a whole new account now with mud fossil research. It's just now, it's fully understood. Velikovsky was right. The myths were right. Mud fossil research is correct. I have all the evidence to prove what I'm saying. And now I believe that we're going to have another birth from Venus, from Jupiter. And if that happens, it's another end of humanity, or start over, because that's what did happen. It had to start over again. It was just almost a complete wipeout. Okay, my outstanding friends, this is going to be interesting. It's going to be scary. I can guarantee you that. But it's going to be interesting. This is Immanuel Velikovsky. Everybody knows that knows me knows he's my hero. I try to make a point of that virtually every time I speak. Because he was the honest scientist. In a world of 100% dishonest scientists, he was the only one who stood up. And they destroyed him for it. But he just kept on and kept on and kept on until they tried to write him out of history. And that's what's being done right now. I have found virtually nobody that knew about Velikovsky. That's in the younger generation, they wrote him out. He was like nothing. Now, he was as accomplished as Einstein. They knew each other. They were both very, very, academically oriented thinkers, let's put it that way. They were theorists. However, Velikovsky went and got all of the documents that supported the historical accounts of how Jupiter, who they called the feared god Jupiter, gave birth to the fiery comet Venus, which turned into a planet eventually. But in the meantime, it almost hit Earth and caused the Great Flood, which I have all the evidence to support now. No question whatsoever. These things were from a great flood, a hot water flood that boiled them and cooked them. Then they dried out and so forth. And I know about the feldspar, the nucleophilic substitution. I know how all of these different marls and basalts and limestones formed, and what body parts they represent, tendons and muscle and organs and all that stuff. This has been very well researched now. So his account of a 3,500 year ago cataclysm causing boiling hot water to destroy the Earth and all of the creatures on it, basically. The only ones that survived were way up high, apparently, in mountains and caves and so forth. They didn't get cooked as the comet came, literally like a spotlight, for 7 days. And they all jumped in the water and so forth, thinking they were going to be saved. Well, they boiled. The ones that went in the caves had a chance to survive. And now, if you were in the lowlands, you'd be flooded and you'd drown. But if you were way up high in a cave, I think you might be able to survive. Anyway, let's find out what he did say and what was recorded. Because this is the key. Let's look at what was recorded. These were eyewitnesses. These aren't people that you go to school every day and they say, oh, listen, those people, they were crazy. They were writing things to scare kids. Don't bring that stuff around here. And that's what they say. When people ask them about my research, they say, don't bring that stuff around here. Don't be talking about that crazy stuff around here. And he said, well, what about it? He's got that. Roger's got evidence. No. You just don't be. You start with that stuff. You're out of here. Basically, I will fail you if you want to think. And that's what happened to him. Okay, they never let up on Velikovsky. They attacked him violently in the beginning, and then when they found all the kind of things he was saying, they were being proven true. So they sort of backed off him, but they just let him fade away into nothingness. Now listen to what he has to say.
Indicating that Venus is hot. It was unbelieved, and therefore the main task of Mariner 2, Mariner first one didn't succeed, of Mariner 2 in December 1962 was to find out whether Venus is really hot. At that time, it was found that it is something like 600 degrees, and the announcement was made that it's most probably a mistaken result. But at that time I wrote that most probably it will be found more than 600. And truly, a few months later, it was announced it is 800 degrees Fahrenheit.
Now, just so you understand, the top scientists said, no, this is just the same kind of temperature as here on Earth, no difference. And then they found it 600 degrees. I said, wow. And it was actually 800 degrees.
And today it's already found that it's over 900 degrees Fahrenheit on the bottom under the clouds. Okay. A temperature at which many metals are molten.
Following the confirmations of the Mariner probes, Velikovsky brought the success of his predictions to the attention of the scientific community.
Now, I'm going to butt in again. I'm going to tell you what they said. Don't say a word about this. I don't want anybody talking about this. And this guy talked up. Listen.
Dr. Motz, Department of Astronomy at Columbia, is a past president of the New York Academy of Science.
After Velikovsky had come to me, I agreed to write a letter to Science delineating his statements, his discoveries, stating that Venus would be found to be very hot, that radio emanations would be found coming from Jupiter, and a number of other things that we specified in the letter. So Dr. Bargman and I did indeed write that letter to Science, indicating that regardless of whether one believed this to have stemmed from Velikovsky's theory, his prior rights to discovery ought to be recognized. And then we indicated that we did not accept his theory as such, but we did accept his discoveries. See. After we had written the letter, the argument was started again, and people did write to me saying that I perhaps should not have done this because clearly saying that Velikovsky had announced these things did not specify the truth of his arguments. And I indicated that I felt that a person who had made an announcement, who had indicated certain things, ought to be given credit for these things.
Do you feel these are very unusual statements to have come true?
Yes, they are very unusual because nobody suspected that Venus would be as hot as it was found to be. And people had no reason to suppose that radio waves would come from Jupiter and that these other things would be found to be so, or the carbohydrates that are thought to be on Venus and things of that sort.
So why did these other scientists feel that this was not proper on your part?
Well, because they felt it would lend support to what they thought was an irrational theory, you see. As a matter of fact, there's nothing irrational about the theory. It is just, Velikovsky does not depart from accepted scientific arguments and scientific theories. It's just that there's no evidence that his ideas apply to this situation at all. See, that is the point.
What he was saying ran against what the high priests of the disciplines felt was the best evidence of the time. In the areas of his probe involved sectors where best evidence itself was questionable. What was best evidence in those areas?
You cannot get a body to do what he says Venus did without altering entirely the distribution of masses in the solar system. The solar system is an extremely stable system. You can't make Venus change from one orbit to another in that way. The sun dominates. The sun is in the center, and therefore there's a regularity that cannot be altered.
This is the kind of assumptions these people make, and then they say we won't look at anything that goes against that. And that's why they went after this guy, because he at least was saying, well, Velikovsky was right, the damn thing's hot. Well, nobody ever expected that. And nobody ever expected any of that stuff. Nobody ever expected Venus to be born from Jupiter. But that's what they all wrote. And these people refused to even look at that, and they destroyed him. Wait till you hear other interviews. Listen. Cannot be altered.
When I was born, intellectually, reason reigned supreme at the University of Chicago. Even after World War II and Hitler, the answer to everything was man's mind. And the beautiful part of being a student at the University of Chicago then was the feeling that nothing was beyond the thought of man, and no problem was beyond his rational solution.
20 years ago, I thought you could persuade people. And now again and again, I think of that terrible remark of Max Planck's that you don't persuade people of anything. The believers in the old ideas die off one after another. That's all that happens.
Exactly. He interviewed him very early into the conflict that Velikovsky found himself in. They call it the Velikovsky affair. They went after him with a vengeance, and he interviewed him. He was asking him all these questions. And Velikovsky, and this guy was really impressed. And you couldn't help yourself from being impressed if you were thinking. And like you said, 20 years ago, I thought maybe you could convince people. No, the people just die off. They have to die off before that goes away. Now, here's the key, though. I have physical evidence. I have physical bones and body parts and DNA and all of that stuff to support the things that I'm saying, which tend to support the things that he said. And then when I show you what's actually happening on Venus, it's very likely that the whole scenario is just about to happen again. Venus is about to give birth, my friends. I'm almost certain of it. All right, so here he goes again. This is, he's talking about Velikovsky, and nobody will listen to him.
20 years ago, I thought you could persuade people. And now again and again, I think of that terrible remark of Max Planck's that you don't persuade people of anything. The believers in the old ideas die off one after another. That's all that happens. It's a very sad experience how little attention people pay to what one would think is convincing evidence.
Yeah, it happens every day. I'm showing probably what is a new species of some kind of humanoid. The toes are built in. We have lots of these, and not just one. They refuse to be examined. They absolutely refuse. And I'm talking about by Yale and Harvard and all of them, all the top ones. I've tried to present it to virtually everybody. And they don't want to see it. They don't want to see it. Same thing as Velikovsky. Same thing. And that guy was exactly right. You can't convince anybody of him. Now, if I was a student and paying the kind of money they're paying, and then being told geology is just some kind of layers of this and layered over that, billions of years and this and that, and these things are just nothing but rocks that look like feet and have DNA in them that is, well, the other ones I have are human DNA, and they look just like what they are. This is a lung. That's a lung. You get any anatomist, And if you can't tell that's a lung, you better find another anatomist. And that's the pleura that's on the lung. It's a fabric. And it's flat as a pancake on the back because it was in the Great Flood. And this is a process called nucleophilic substitution, which invades the living tissue, which is ready to be invadable. Every bit of your tissue right now is just dying to be invaded. And I mean that literally, because if it's not invaded, it will die. And when you say invaded, my tissue's being invaded? Yes, it is. How do you think oxygen gets to where it has to go? How do you think glucose gets to where it has to go? And all of the different things in your body and the minerals and the things that make your body function, they are invaded. They invade your tissues. And then they take on the stuff that was in there, the garbage, and they remove it. That's how life works. It's a continuous process of dying. And in 4 or 5 minutes, you're dead if you don't continuously invade your tissues. Nothing is understood at the moment. The answers are just too simple. You need to go to the real root of everything, and that's just never done anymore. It's just read page 25. This is just too much. I mean, it's way too much. Listen to this.
Atmospheric jets that go far deeper, about 3,000 kilometers. Scientists are still trying to unravel the mechanism behind how these jets move. So far, there's only one clue from the spacecraft data. Atmospheric ammonia gas is moving up and down in the jets.
All right. Did you hear they said atmospheric ammonia gas is moving up and down in the jets of the Great Red Spot? Well, guess what? All right, I'm sorry, but look, why does my vagina smell like ammonia? That's what the vagina on Jupiter smells like too, ammonia. Okay, they're still trying to account for this storm as a storm. Well, it's bulging out, which forces the speed of the winds to get faster and faster. It's just fully understood.
Directions. A small anticyclone wouldn't merge with the Great Red Spot, but shatter into pieces instead. And these pieces of different shapes would then separate from the storm. This is what astronomers believe they are observing. And the Great Red Spot is still shrinking. According to scientists...
Just watch this. That's... I've shown you, and I'll show you again, how anatomically exact it is. And watch what it's doing. It looks like it's bulging the cervix.
Calculations, it could disappear in about 20 years. Jupiter is unlikely to be affected, but there may be some irreversible processes that the...
You see this? It's bulging. All right, it's bulging, and all of these things have to sweep around this. It's coming from this direction, it looks like. And all of these things have to sweep around this. This right here is a latch, actually, that latches it to the body. I'll show you that. Where do you see this? They're missing so much here because they don't understand how unbelievable this is. And I agree. It's hard to let your mind roam into here. But if you read what Velikovsky wrote, what was written in history, and you can look, I could show you the anatomy.
Storm was preventing. Only time will tell what will happen when the storm completely disappears.
Well, only time will tell if it produces a baby planet, where that planet will end up in its celestial place. Will it impact Earth? Will it impact something else? What will it do? So, my friends, this is what I'm saying. This is possible. Let me show you some anatomical views that support what I'm saying. Well, like I said, my friends, if you don't want anybody to see the human anatomy, don't look. But that is a vagina. Now, all of these tissue layers, all of these different tissue layers, even the hairs, even this little tab that I showed before, that little white tab that's trailing off, is on Jupiter's Great Red Spot. The vagina, it goes deep in there. They said now it's like 1,000 miles deep or more. Before they thought it was more or less on the surface. This is the Venus mound. This is the mons pubis. It's called the Venus mound. Somebody knew about this stuff. Even the hairs are up there. Can I show you that? Absolutely I can. Here it is right here. Now here's what it looks like from afar. There's your tissue layer, the same thing, your clitoris, however you want to pronounce it. Up above, which I can't show you, is the Venus Mons, which is the mound of Venus. And that's why all these clouds are swirling around trying to get around this mound. And they're going faster now because they're trying to get around the mound. That's the vaginal canal. I believe they call it the urethra. This is that tag that I told you where they were showing the white stuff trailing off. This is it right here. These are the hairs. These are literally what you see, and the other one is the hair. Look, all the way around. It's very, very, very uniform. Very uniform. You see that? That's not just accidental. And that's what it is. Now it's turned round where you can basically see the cervix inside. All right, everything I just showed you is identical to this. The tag, the hairs, the clitoris, where the Venus mound is, the labia, all of that stuff. It's all there. It's the same stuff. It's just a vagina. Is it going to give birth? It sure looks like it to me. Okay, I believe I've mentioned Velikovsky. Velikovsky's Venus, a controversial 1950 book, declared our neighbor world was spawned by Jupiter 3,500 years ago and nearly struck Earth twice. And what his exact statement was, the feared god Jupiter gave birth to the fiery comet Venus. That's what was recorded on every continent and every culture on the face of the planet. All right, listen to this. Velikovsky said, yes, I am at odds with established physics, but any inconsistencies weren't due to his myth as fact interpretation. Instead, he pointed to the need for a new approach to celestial mechanics to understand what was written versus what we see, in which electrical forces, magnetism, trumped the power of gravity. Well, I don't care about that. I care about what was written and what we see happening as we are watching right now. It said, understandably, astronomers of the day were outraged by all of this, understandably. It took Velikovsky 4 years to get his book published, and getting a green light from Macmillan, in part because a sympathetic Gordon Atwater, who I think I showed in one of these clips, head of astronomy at New York's American Museum of Natural History, promised to create a show for Hayden Planetarium to depict the book's planetary pinball. But Atwater was fired, summarily, they walked in and fired him before that could happen. Strenuous objections by Harvard's Harlow Shapley, Cecile Payne-Goatskin, and other academics, including a boycott of Macmillan's astronomy textbooks. They wouldn't buy any more textbooks from him. It caused the publisher to jettison the book, to jettison this literary but potato, this literally hot potato. And they just left it off to Doubleday. The book and its author merited a blistering editorial in Sky and Telescope. They tried to destroy him, and they did. They kept him out of... You don't hear his name. You're never going to hear his name, and if you bring it up in your science courses, they're going to tell you you're an idiot, and you don't talk about him anymore. That's how they handle these things. Now listen to this. This is really interesting, because this is NASA, and they're talking about Comet Shoemaker-Levy impacting Jupiter. Now, where did Comet Shoemaker-Levy come from? They had no idea. They said, well, it must have been floating around out there for a long time, and then all of a sudden it decided to crash into the surface. Well, maybe. However, this was 1994. Guess what also happened in 1994? Neptune, after gyrating like crazy, spit out something out of itself and then went quiet. Well, what did it spit out? I don't know. Let me put it this way. I don't know if it spit anything out or not, but I think it did. And I think that was the thing it spit out that impacted with Jupiter. And I think it might have been the seed that kicked off these events, because it was like 10 years later or so that they started to see some changes in the red spot. And now it's changing very fast. Okay, once again, Roger, the fairest fair user in the land. This is Science, NASA, and here's what they're talking about. The lasting impacts of Comet Shoemaker-Levy. Did it leave any lasting impacts? Well, it might.
At the close of the last century, a comet captured into orbit around a planet traveled too close and was shredded by its gravity into multiple pieces, some as large as half a mile or 1 kilometer long. Those fragments would plunge into the planet's atmosphere in...
Look at that. Who knows? Who knows?
a series of impacts. Would the impacts be spectacular? Or would the comet fragments disappear without a trace? In July 1994, astronomers around the world watched with bated breath as the fragments of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 slammed into the planet Jupiter. Dr. Kelly Fast was one of the impact's observers, and is now manager of NASA's Near-Earth Object Observations program.
It was just incredible to watch. Such an impact event had never before been witnessed, let alone studied. Ground-based telescopes around the world and spacecraft like NASA's Hubble Space Telescope and even the Galileo orbiter en route to Jupiter were used to observe the impacts. The discovery of the comet by Carolyn and Gene Shoemaker and David Levy gave us about a year to plan our observations.
The impacts proved to be impressive. The fragments, some 21 in all, plunged into Jupiter's atmosphere over the course of 6 days. At impact, they were traveling at a speed of about 37 miles per second, or 60 kilometers per second, heating the atmosphere to at least 53,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or 30,000 degrees Celsius. Like the splash from throwing a rock into a pond, the impacts created giant plumes of material from Jupiter's lower atmosphere, which rose as high as 1,900 miles, or 3,000 kilometers above.
Boy, that looks like ejecta.
Of the cloud tops into the stratosphere. In the aftermath, the plume splashback scarred Jupiter's atmosphere with dark clouds of impact debris, which could be seen for months as they were gradually dispersed by Jupiter's winds. So what were scientists able to learn about Jupiter itself as a result of the impacts? For one thing, those dark clouds of impact debris acted as tracers of the winds in Jupiter's stratosphere, and by following their motion over time, scientists could measure those high-altitude winds. Temporary changes in the aurora on Jupiter showed scientists that Jupiter's magnetosphere was influenced by particles from the impacts.
We are still able to see changes in Jupiter's atmosphere that resulted from the impacts. When the fragments of Shoemaker-Levy 9 slammed into Jupiter, they deposited their own chemical compounds, the impact processes produced some, and others were exhumed from the lower atmosphere.
Exactly. What did it deposit?
Some molecules, like ammonia, were destroyed by sunlight in the weeks and months after the impacts.
You hear this? Ammonia. That was from vaginal. They say that's vaginal smell is ammonia quite often. Anyway.
But others, like hydrogen cyanide and water, are still seen today. All of that tells scientists about how chemistry works in Jupiter's atmosphere.
Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 showed us that large impacts still happen in the solar system, and were a factor in NASA developing programs to address the impact risk to Earth. From comet science to Jupiter science to the science of impacts, the legacy of that serendipitous discovery by Carolyn and Gene Shoemaker and David Levy continues to this day.
Okay, let's take it to the next step, and let's think about what I'm talking about. All right, little known fact, the mound of Venus, a little known region which is key to making her climax. I can't testify to that specifically, but it could be. Okay, this is from the Planetary Society, which they're, deep into this stuff. This goes to 2021, October, so a little over a year ago, just about a year ago. And it says the shape of the Jupiter's Great Red Spot is changing. Here's why. Well, I'm going to tell you why, as I probably already have, but I can tell you it is changing for sure. Now, they did a big new study on this somewhere over here. Here it is. A new study published in the Journal of Geophysical Research Letters. Now, this is from the AGU, Advancing Earth and Space Sciences. Well, Geophysical Research Letters. This is evolution of the horizontal winds in Jupiter's Great Red Spot from 1 Jovian year. And let's look into it a little deeper. Okay, my friends, this is from the very advanced geophysical research letters from highly involved people. And they're talking about the abstract. The circularization of the Great Red Spot cannot be explained by changes in the horizontal wind shear of the surrounding environment. So they cannot explain it. The velocity fields suggest no long-term trend in a static stability inside or outside the vortex. Instead, the changes are accompanied by a 4 to 8% increase in the main wind speed of the high-speed ring around the outside from 29 to 2020. And that's what I'm saying. It's mounding up. And they have to speed up. As it mounds up, the winds have to speed up. It's just that's what happens. Now, changes in the wind field coincided with the South Equatorial Belt outbreak storms in 2016 and 2017, but not with, listen to this, with the 2019 flaking events involving detachment of red material from the main oval. Red material flaking off. What happens just before a baby's born? Okay, you can read this, but the bottom line is they have no clue what's causing it, but they are admitting this is exactly what's happened. The Great Red Spot is turning very round, it's sloughing off red stuff, and it's swelling up. All right, remember, this was from, I can't remember when they took this. This was from the first close-up mission they took, but it was an early mission. And this was normal-looking vagina. And this is that spot I will show you again. And they say it's sloughing off blood and turning completely round. That's a little concerning. You know, this is the original shot of Jupiter's red spot that I say gave birth to Venus, and that is exactly what Velikovsky said, and that's what's written in history. Every culture had the same story. Now, why am I talking about this if it's going to give birth again and pretty much destroy the Earth, which it could, very well could. That's exactly what happened last time. It was absolute devastation. Now, am I doing this just to scare you? At one point I decided maybe I shouldn't even do this. Because there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. The only thing you can do about it is try to find peace within your own mind of, what settles your mind. I don't know what it will be. This is where it gets really tricky because people say, "Oh, what are you talking about this stuff for? You just don't scare us." Well, I talk about things that I see, about truth that I put pieces together. It's not to scare anybody. It's just to, what it's done for me. I'm going to tell you exactly what it's done for me. Maybe do nothing for you, maybe do something for you. I never even believed any of this stuff. It could possibly be true. I mean, it's insane. It really is literally insane. Even the most educated or the most religious or whatever, they still don't believe any of this stuff. So this is a myth. This is the myths. But when you start breaking down the myths, it's exactly what it says in the Bible. So you have to make a determination, does this have any effect on you? Well, to me, yes, it did. And to me, the only thing I can say is there's good and bad of all kinds of things. And there's some terrible, terrible, terrible things, it seems like. And you either go to one side or you go to the other, it appears. I don't think there's any end. That's what it appears to me. And, the only guy I could see that was offering for peace and love and, treat your neighbor like yourself, don't take advantage, don't do this, be charitable, all these kind of things was Jesus Christ. And he was saying some things that nobody else knew. He said that the earth is a body and a creature, and a body and a corpse. And he said all kinds of things that ended up being, the stones would cry out if you silenced everybody, and they did. The academics have silenced everyone, and they said trying to silence me. It's not going to happen. It's being seen. Now you make your own determination. Does this have an effect on you, or is this just some kind of curiosity? That's the thing. I don't know. That's up to you. All right. So don't forget. There's the Great Red Spot. Now, what happened within the last few years? Here it is right here. It's turned round. I mean, to me, boy, I'll tell you, that looks like a cervix, basically. Jupiter's Great Red Spot may not be disappearing. No, it's about to give birth. Look, see, great seem to be flaking off. Bits are flaking off. Yikes. Listen to this. Recent images showed more red cloud shrinkage, leading to headlines the spot could die within 20 years. In spring 2019, astronomers reported that it was unraveling and shedding large blades and flakes of red clouds, which are blood clots, scabs. All right, I refer to the ancient myths as not being myths, being just ancient history. And this is about Venus and Adonis, from incest to beauty. Now, let's just talk about what we do know about. It says, in this article, we will take a careful look into the Greek myth of Adonis and Venus. We'll start by exploring its canonical version from Ovid's Metamorphoses, next to other classical and post-classical adaptations from ancient Orphic hymns to William Shakespeare. Ovid was the guy. Metamorphoses you should read, because I believe that's just actually a fact. It's got to be. You see this? This is Ovid. Listen to this. He was one of the top writers in history. Ovid was a Roman poet who lived during the reign of Augustus. He was a contemporary of Virgil and Horace, in whom he is often ranked as one of the three canonical poets of Latin literature. One of the top guys in forever. And wait till you see what he wrote about Metamorphoses. However, listen to this. The imperial scholar Quintilian considered him the last of the Latin love elegists. Although Ovid enjoyed enormous popularity during his lifetime, the Emperor Augustus banished him to a remote province on the Black Sea, where he remained a decade until his death. Basically the same thing they did to Velikovsky. All right, this is Ovid's book, Metamorphoses. And this was what got him in trouble, because he showed that there was gods and so forth that were recorded in history by Hesiod, who was narrated to by the daughters of Zeus. They told him to write the history of mankind, the daughters of Zeus, who was the god of this solar system, who was, it appears to be, a little bit out of control. And they said there was bad gods came down and took over and had sex with the women and everything. And they could, because they could transform, they could morph. They could turn themselves into anything they wanted. Literally anything they wanted. That's what the whole story of Metamorphosis is. And it appears to be likely true. Right, this was no puppy work just flown off for a few hours. One of the most influential works in Western culture. Metamorphosis inspired Dante, Boccaccio, Chaucer, Shakespeare. Numerous episodes from the poem have been depicted in works of sculpture, painting, music. This was all very, very, very serious. All right, don't forget, these are Ovid's books. The Creation, Ages of Mankind, The Flood, Deucalion, who is Noah, and Pyrrha, who is his wife, Apollo, Daphne, Phaeton, Callisto, all of these different gods and moons, Europa, all of these things, Mars, Venus. These are all depicted as creatures. They were gods. And it appears that they're still around. I don't know if they have any any abilities anymore. I have no idea about any of this stuff at this moment. But these were all things that were written. Now let me tell you what they did write, which makes it all plausible that these gods could turn themselves into anything they wanted. Metamorphosis means you can take a butterfly and get it out of a caterpillar, that type of thing. It's a change, one thing changes to another. And here's what it says. This was his book, the first book he ever wrote. Metamorphosis, transformation, a unifying theme, transforming, unifying theme amongst all of his episodes of the Metamorphosis. Ovid raises its significance explicitly right in the opening lines of the poem. And he does it in, of course, Latin. In nova fert animus mutatus dicere a formus cupora. What does that mean? It means I intend to speak of forms changed into new entities. And he's talking about people and bodies and creatures. Accompanying this theme is often violence inflicted upon a victim whose transformation becomes part of the natural landscape. The whole world is a natural landscape of creatures. I don't know if they were all victims or not, but this theme amalgamates the much explored opposition between the hunter and the hunted and the thematic tension between art and nature. These get very deep, this stuff. Now, listen to this. This is the kind of variations they could transform. A great variety of transforming humans into inanimate objects like the Nile River or a constellation. Animals or into animals or ants or funguses or mushrooms. They could change their sexes. They could turn into pebbles and hyenas, anything they wanted. Literally anything they wanted. That's why, even though there were moons and planets and so forth, they could change their physical form down to the size of a human being, come down and have sex with them. And that's why all the gods were godly formed. They were all perfectly formed because they could change into anything they want. So that you didn't have too many out-of-shape looking gods. They came down to have sex with the women. And they could change themselves, just as it says, metamorphosis. And that's what Zeus was doing all the time. He was chasing women like everywhere. Okay, so I'm telling you, we know there's dragons, we know all these things. And it appears to me that all the things in the myth was true. And Velikovsky's research, absolutely, as far as I can determine, was spot on, because he got it from the eyewitnesses. All right, listen to this. This is from Velikovsky's book, and this is Worlds in Collision. And this is part one, Venus.
No book or collection of books in the history of mankind has had a more attentive reading, a wider circulation, or more diligent investigation than the Old Testament. R. H. Pfeiffer, Introduction to the Old Testament. Chapter 1. The Most Incredible Story. The most incredible story of miracles is told about Joshua ben Nun, who, when pursuing the Canaanite kings at Bet Horon, implored the sun and the moon to stand still. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou, moon, in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies.
I mean, come on. And they're going to say it in a second here. But what would happen to a spinning planet that had a whole batch of atmosphere attached to it, and another one coming in, pushing against that atmosphere? So it's spinning, and then this is pushing against it. They could stand still. The interaction could force this not to continue to rotate for a period of time until this pushed and caused all the floods and all the impact and all of the fires and all that stuff. It would all be happening almost instantaneously as it did. Now, how would he know to say, stand still, stop, everything stop? Well, somehow he must have been hooked in with whoever sent Venus, who had to be Jupiter. Jupiter. It sounds like it was a messenger of destruction. because they talk about, he had to flood it and get rid of the giants, and there was giants here that were just absolutely stunningly large. And anyway, let's just listen to what he has to say about this one a little further. So let me just come back just a smidge. Here goes.
Moon to stand still. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou, moon, in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day. Joshua chapter 10, verses 12 to 13. This story is beyond the belief of even the most imaginative or the most pious person. Waves of stormy sea may have drowned one host and been merciful to another. The earth could crack asunder and swallow up human beings. The Jordan could be blocked by a slice of its bank falling into the bed of the river. Jericho's walls, not by the blast of trumpets, but by an incidental earthquake, could have been breached. But that the sun and the moon should halt in their movement across the firmament, this could be only the product of fancy, a poetic image, a metaphor, a hideous implausibility when imposed as a subject for belief, a matter for scorn.
Exactly. People immediately say, that guy's got to be out of his freaking mind. Just leave him alone. Put him in a corner. All right, this is basically what they claim happened. In every culture on Earth, as Velikovsky recorded, they all had the same story. Venus came out of Jupiter's great red spot, spinning backwards, hotter than hell, headed towards Earth. Earth being here, they're about the same size. It's coming towards Earth. Now, Earth is just spinning away like it normally does, rolling along, just like its normal thing. And all of a sudden, this comes, and it says, woo, 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 woo. And the atmospheres are pushing against each other's atmospheres. Not only is it stopping the Earth from spinning, because it's pushing against its atmosphere now, it would also combust the atmosphere because of that explosive impact of the atmospheres against the other atmosphere. And it did. Everything boiled and combusted in the whole 9 yards. And the Earth could have stopped for it to be going, trying to go, and this is pushing back with its field. Because it was a reverse spinner, don't forget. It wasn't spinning correctly so that they worked together. It was spinning backwards, causing this one to crush into it. And anyway, it's a little bit of a technical thing, but it could possibly have done it. And at the same time, all of that stuff was happening that Velikovsky talks about. It was recorded. They had huge hot water floods, hot water. This impact up there would combust. And what was happening is around the atmospheres you have hydrogen and oxygen, but it's in the OH, not H2O, normally OH. When it gets compressed and cold and so forth, it turns into H2O and your rain and everything. Well, when this combusted and hit, it would heat it up like hell, but it still would compress it enough to turn it into water. So you wouldn't have that rain coming down, nice regular wet rain. You'd have boiling water coming out of the sky. And everything else would be boiling too from the heat of impact. And that's what killed all of these creatures and ended up having them boiled, literally boiled. And then they separated along body parts, and then they landed flat. And then waters ran off, and then they dried up and turned into stone. That's what the mud fossils are all about. I got them coming out of my ears. And like I said, I believe new species, or at least something that looks like a human being. Oh. But if the toes are built in, we have lots of these too. It's exactly like a human being. It almost looks like it was a shoe. Look at that. It looks like it even had a shoe pad built right in. I'm not kidding you. But it's not. There's springs in here. You see that little circle right there? There's a pin in here. And they have springs and instead of tendons. We have them so eroded down you can see inside. But that's the, underneath the pads of the foot. I mean, it's a little bit eroded, but not much. If I put this under a microscope, you can see I put my belt under the microscope and I put this under the microscope. You can't tell any difference. There's no difference at all. It's leather. All right, so this is feathers. That's leather. This is fascia, which is a coating of I think they also might call it periosteum. It's a coating of a rubber membrane that surrounds, every part of your body is surrounded with a little membrane. And that's what you're looking at here. It's called collagen, and it turns into feldspar. That's what they call feldspar. This one over here is a DNA certified CAT scan, all 9 yards, and it's a human lung. And that's where the heart was. It's a left human lung. And again, flat as a pancake because it was in the flood, boiled out of the creatures' bodies, and their bodies turned into the mud. That's what all the mud is, and the sand and everything. And then all of the little bone pieces came out of them and turned into stones. That's what you see laying around, all the stones. They're not just stones, they're body parts, primarily. Some of them are sedimentary things, but not a whole lot of them. The things they always thought were sedimentary, very, very few are. Now, this could be total coincidence, or it could be exactly what happened. Still a Destiny channel. The big dark spot on Neptune, which was discovered in '89, also proved to be short-lived. Now listen to this. It sounded like it was gyrating, and then it just stopped in 1994. Listen.
On Neptune, which was discovered in 1989, was also proved to be short-lived. The wind around the storm reached supersonic speeds of up to 2,400 kilometers per hour. The large dark spot was constantly changing its shape and size. With that,
I mean, it sounds like the thing possibly could have been ejaculating. Because in 1994 is when Jupiter was hit with comet Shoemaker-Levy. Now, where that came from, I don't know.
That much activity, the storm was clearly not going to subside, and yet, in 1994, it disappeared. But let's get back to the Great Red Spot. The Juno spacecraft passed over the anticyclone twice in 2019. It took images of the storm to help determine its nature. Using Juno's data, scientists compiled a three-dimensional model of Jupiter.
Now, this is what we want to look at, is these stripes. They don't understand why these stripes are here. I do. And it's because of the impact of spiraling, spinning Jupiter, moving forward, spinning around the sun as we are dragged through the arm of the Milky Way. These are push-to-shove zones, exactly like interference patterns in my light experiments, because this is what it is. It's hitting light. Light is hitting into here. And the light is being divided into its impact zones and creating magnetic fields. That's what's happening. These are magnetic fields. I can show it on the, well, I will show it on the eclipse of the sun. You can see it's the same thing. The sun does exactly the same thing. It has three spots just like that. All right, this is the sun behind the moon, so we can see all of the emanations of the sun. You see these three red spots? Those are the impact zone. The sun is spinning just like we're spinning, like everything is spinning, and we're also being dragged through space at the same time. And these are the zones that create these magnetic bubbles. You see it? What's between the magnetic bubbles is a dark spot, the dark spot. All right? This is exactly what they're seeing on Jupiter. And it is because of the impact of the particles that are basically the sun's atmosphere. It has an atmosphere just like we have an atmosphere. And at a certain point, it in our case, the particles come back and wrap back around again in a magnetic field. Here, it's so energetic, they go. But the point being is that it's the impact of the sun into all the particles in the universe, which is, Fermilab calls it the quantum foam, which it is. It's just loaded with these same particles that are coming out of here. They come out of every luminous body. They're in space out here. The same particles started here, are out here now. You don't see them anymore because they're not impacting. Here they're just like, get out of my way. And they're just, ugh. And here, of course, these are the poles. And so you know it's spinning this way. And this is the impact. We know it's spinning this way because these are the impact zones. It increases the impact. This is the trailing zone. There's no glow over here, these red spots. Now, let's go back and look at that great red spot. I'm telling you, that's a vagina. Now, they say, oh, if Zeus was a male god, how would it have a vagina? They could change themselves into anything. That's what was written. They could change themselves into ants or fungus or rivers or anything. And all of the moons and everything are gods or parts of gods. They're all from living creatures. All right, let me explain to you precisely what's happening here and why. The sun is much more massive than everything in the solar system, and it is attractive. Anything that has a lot of mass becomes very attractive. The heavier the mass, the more attraction. So it's trying to pull all us with it, but we're all being pulled through the arm of the Milky Way, which I'll show you in a minute. So look at all this tangle of all these particles, which are moons and planets. Well, if Jupiter emits one more in this tangle of mess here, something's going to happen. Somebody's going to be affected. This is us. Last time it was Mars. Well, certainly something's going to happen. So let's see, is it realistic to think that it may be going to give birth like it did 3,500 years ago, recorded in every single culture on the face of this planet? So that did happen. Could it happen again? Well, it said it gave birth, and I see birth usually comes from some kind of birth canal. Let's see if that makes sense. So if you have little kids and you don't want to see birth canals, don't look. All right, so just consider this. Here we are with our solar system going through one of these arms of the Milky Way, spinning like crazy, all those things tangled around and being ripped through this. Are we going to hit dense space? Are we going to hit open space? What's going on? We have no idea where we're headed. We have no idea what's in front of us. We didn't even realize that we're traveling in that kind of a mode. They always thought all these things were flat. That's not flat. That's a cone. All right, it's either going that way or it's coming this way, one or the other. You can't have this kind of swirl around and be moving one direction. It would rip the arms back this way and back this way. You'd have a bullet at the tip. And you do have a bullet at the tip, but it's either going this way or this way. And that's the only way you can get this kind of a swirl. All right, so hopefully this will make sense to you. It's spinning like crazy this way. This is the impact zone where it's creating the magnetic fields. That's what's creating this white stripe. I think this is a reverse image because this should be dark and that should be white according to the impact. Wherever there's impact, you create whiteness. Whiteness causes the blackness to be pushed to both sides. All right, so this is pushing, and then it creates another whiteness because the impact creates push to shove, push to shove, push to shove, and then it sort of surrounds the outside. Down here, it shouldn't be as white as it is. It should be more dark because this is not where you're going to have a lot of impact. So I think this is backwards. This is, to my way of thinking, this should be dark and this should be white. But it's going to be layered like this, doesn't matter. So they made a three-dimensional model.